Welcome everyone to this segment of For the Shabbos Table for Parshas Korach, sponsored by the Rubin family, and their grant has made it possible for you to enjoy these remarks to share with your family on Shabbos. We wish from Hashem that the Rubin family should be blessed with everything wonderful. We also want to learn for Avigdor Aryeh ben Rivka. You should have a refuah shleima b'seich she'achel Yisrael. So we know that Chazal tell us that Korach einoi hit'asai. His eye made him make a mistake. He saw b'nevuah that there would descend from him Shmuel Hanavi. Shmuel. Moshe v'Aaron b'Kayana v'Shmuel b'Kari Shemai. So he said, look, I know that Moshe Rabbeinu said that only the ones that Hashem will accept the Keteris will live. Well, I must live because I and my family are with me, and there's a nevuah that Shmuel will come for me. So that means that we won't perish. Of course, he was mistaken because he didn't realize that the last minute his sons would do tshuva and turn away from his camp, and it's from them that Shmuel came. B'nei Korach lo meisu, a ledge came out and caught them as they were on the way to fall to Gehenna. There's a lesson in this, and that is knowing the future can be very dangerous. What caused Korach to be misled is because he knew the future. It's a very dangerous thing. The Torah frowns on all types of trying to find out the future. It says that you shouldn't be darish al hamesim, which is called the art of necromancy, to communicate with the dead. Oiv v'yadaini, practitioners of Oiv v'yadaini, which are different ways to try to figure out the future, are capital punishments. Hashem didn't make it that we should know the future. The famous story of Shlomo HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech knew the language of the birds. And there was a man who was a great linguist, and he really wanted to know the language of the birds. And he went to Shlomo HaMelech, I'm very talented, please teach me. Shlomo HaMelech told him it's not a good idea, but the man insisted. So finally, after much pushing, Shlomo HaMelech taught it to him. So the man would go and he would be intrigued by the conversations of the birds. And one day, the birds were flying around his flock, and he heard them say to each other, you see that flock? It's diseased. As soon as the man heard that, he quickly sold his flock. And he followed it, and he saw that they all died after a short while. He said, wow, was I right to learn the language of the birds? About a month later, he saw some birds flying over his roof. He inclined his head to hear them talking, and they said, see that house? It's full of termites. Before long, it's going to cave in. He heard that. He quickly sold his house, moved somewhere else, and found out that his house collapsed. Wow, he said, boy, was I lucky. This is a skill that saved me so much money and so much aggravation. A few months later, he's walking in the park. He sits down to rest on the bench. Two birds perch near him, and one says to the other, you see that man sitting on the bench? He's going to die next week. The man looked very alarmed and ran to Shlomo HaMelech and told him, now what do I do? So Shlomo HaMelech looked at him with sad eyes and said, tell me the story from the beginning. He said, well, I heard the birds talking that my flock would die, and I sold it. Then I heard that my house was full of termites, and I sold it. But now I heard that they said that I'm going to die. What do I do? So Shlomo HaMelech told him mournfully, didn't I tell you that it's not good to listen to the language of the birds. Obviously, you did some grievous sins. Hashem wanted to give you a kapara by taking away your flock, but you didn't let him. Then Hashem wanted to give you atonement by ruining your house with termites, but you didn't give him a chance to do that either. So now all that's left is Hashem to punish your body. Usually the Rebbeinu Shalom does things slowly. That's why there's saras in the Torah on begadim, on clothing, then on houses, and then on the body. Because first Hashem gives it to the clothing, then in the house, only later on the body. The Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't like to punish a person with death, so he gives them other suffering. But this person who should not have looked into the future did so, and look what happened. That's why the Dara Mabel was punished with death. Hashem would have punished their property, their animals, their crops, but it says that Ki hishkas kol basar darka la'aretz, everything was stolen. That's the meaning of Lo nechtam gzar din el ala chamas. Even though they did much more terrible sins of immorality, but because everything was stolen, nothing was theirs, there was nothing for Hashem to punish. So he had to punish their bodies. The Rebbeinu Shalom is the idea Hasidus. We're tamim tiyem Hashem alikecha. Our way is not to go to people who, so-called mekubalim, who are going to tell us the future. We don't look at zodiacs and signs. That's not our way. Hashem didn't want us to know. I lost my first Rebbetzin when she was 54. Blessedly, all the 38 years that we were married, most of them I didn't know that this fate was hanging over her head. How that would have colored and saddened my whole existence if I knew that we wouldn't grow old together. The Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't want us to know the future. Moshe Rabbeinu, in a last-ditch attempt to convince Dasan and Aviram to step aside from this suicidal mission of Korach, says that he's willing to go to them. And they answered in the most chutzpahdik way, even if you would gouge out our eyes, we won't come. The Achaim HaKadosh says, when a person is embroiled in the quicksand of machlokes, they don't think straight. Imagine Moshe Rabbeinu was offering them yechidus, private chance to talk about it, that they should hear his side. He wanted to save them. What an honor. And they said instead, blind our eyes instead of meeting with Moshe Rabbeinu. It's so mavubal. So it doesn't make sense, but that's what happens. Chavetz Chaim tells over a story that in a nearby town there was the district manager of the town, and a Jewish neighbor got into a very bad fight with him. And the Jewish neighbor threatened that he's going to tell the Tsar about the illegal things that the district manager was doing in the town. And this man's wife said to him, "What are you doing? The district manager has freed our children from the draft. He could send our children to the draft. How could you fight with him? How could you threaten him?" So he said to her in anger, I'll be myself drafted. I'll have you drafted. I'll have the children drafted. I'll do anything, but I'm going to topple him from his position. That's how people get so crazy when they get it. That's why we have to watch. Like I said in the share this week, the main share, that's how we have to watch and stay away from machloikis like it's a poison. We have to develop an allergy to machloikis. Now, I think I must have seen this somewhere. I don't think I thought of it on my own, but just to tell you an alternate pshat, that Dasan Aviram thought that Moshe Rabbeinu was going to try to bribe them. So they said, that the eyes of these people would you blind, because a bribe is a sheikhad yaver einei pikhed. Sheikhad, bribery, blinds the eyes. That's what they meant. We're not going to let you gouge out our eyes with a bribe. Lo inala. The whole purpose of this parsha is forewarned, is forearmed, to teach us the gnus, the ugliness of machlokes. So I want to share from you the great Gaon, Rav Chaim Pelagi, one of the most prolific writers in the last several hundred years. He writes as follows: Ani hagever ra'asa einai. My eyes have beheld with my experience. Miyayim shamadati al daiti, from my very, very beginnings. Ki kol ish ve'isha, any man or woman. Mishpacha, any family. Medina, any country. Shahayu b'nei machlokes, that engaged in fighting. Lo yotzu nekiyam habeis kitais. Either side did not escape unscathed, untouched. V'nilku bein begufan bein b'mamayim. Rachman al-Litzlan. And they suffered both in body and financially. Rather, he says, La'olam, always, even though you're on the side of right, La'olam yehei mevater, you should look away. And whatever you lose, v'yotzev seidoi b'scharai, your loss will be much made up by your profit of walking away from a fight. You'll have reward in this world and the next world. Misibas oev shalom v'ratfeyu, since you are embracing the tremendous way of loving peace and pursuing it. And then he goes over again with poetic language. Ani hagever re'esei einai, my eye has saw throughout the time. The bekol bayis shahoya by machloikis be'erev Shabbos la'es erev, that any house that has a fight between husband and wife towards the night of Shabbos, oy b'Shabbos kodesh, hayu badek menusa, it's tried and tested. Lo yotzum nikiyam ba'isa shmua ba'eza mikrara, they won't escape the next week in having something bad happen. That's very scary. The idea is that Shabbos is the Mekara Bracha, and if we do something terrible like fighting with a spouse on Shabbos, it will have ripple effects during the week. He writes that when he would hear a neighbor fighting with his spouse or her spouse at the Shabbos table, he would run over and sit with them to diffuse it. I have known that the great Rav Belsky, the Rosh Yeshiva V'das, also left his Shabbos table in order to diffuse Shalom Bayis problems. We have to know that it's brought down that when Adam and Chava sinned in the 10th hour of Erev Shabbos, which would lead to them being separated for 130 years, the Satan was given a koyach to create a wedge between husband and wife on Erev Shabbos. The Ben Ish Chai says that's also because since there's the glorious mitzvah of Aina, Friday night, which brings Shechina into the home, the Satan tries to distract it already from Erev Shabbos. I've quoted many times Rabbi Frand, who said, you should tell yourself the only reason why I'm getting so hot under the collar is not because of the item itself, but because it's Erev Shabbos. And tell yourself that, and don't get angry. It's a very, very important thing to be careful with this. You talk about the greatness of being a mavater. The Sefer Oitzes HaTorah brings down that the Alta from the Vardik heard that a very wealthy Jew in Germany, before he died, instructed that a certain huge building should be given to the Novardik Yeshiva, which was a very, very big thing. And the Alta from Novardik already set out to travel to Germany. Along the way, he got news that another yeshiva thought that they were the recipient of that building, and they were also on the way to Germany. And the Alta looked into it and realized that it was going to be a machlokes. And he said, I'm not traveling to Germany to get into a big machlokes. He didn't even go to see and to discuss. He turned around and he was mavater on the whole thing. That's how great people ran away from machlokes. Remember what we said in the shir. Machlokes chelik mavas. It's a portion of death. It starts with a mem, ends with a suf, that's mace. You know, Rashi says that even tapim, even children and toddlers, babies, die for the sin of machlokes. The toxic fumes of a home with machlokes is lethal and poisonous. It's the worst thing that we can do to our families to get involved in machlokes. Vayikumu lefnei Moshe, they stood before Moshe. Va'anoshim mibnei Yisrael chamishim u'masayim nesiei Eda kruei moyed anshe Shem. There's something that's very frightening that the great Ma'or V'Shemesh writes about the 250 people. It says nesiei Eda kruei moyed anshe Shem. The Rabbeinu Bachya says that included in the 250 were the Nesiim that brought the Chanukas HaMizbeach. Amongst them was Nachshon ben Aminadav. We know that Nachshon ben Aminadav was famous for, according to one opinion, being the first one of all of Klal Yisrael to show faith in Hashem and to jump into the Yam Suf until it reached his neck, and then the sea split. So he had a hand in saving all of Klal Yisrael. And he made a public Kiddush Hashem. And yet here he was from the 250 people that perished in the Adas Korach. Now, although it's not universal, the Marzu on the Medrash Rabbah says that Nachshon ben Aminadav and Shlomiel ben Tzivshadeh was not amongst them, and that's why he says Kruei Moyed is Chaser Yud. There are only 10 of the Nesiim, but not all 12. But the Ma'or V'Shemesh was one of our major commentaries, and the Pashtus and the Gerson, Rabbeinu Bachya, says that Nachshon ben Aminadav perished in this terrible, terrible time. Now, this is important for several reasons. The first thing is that we have to know that to be a successful Yid, you need to achieve shleimus in the different areas in life. Nachshon ben Aminadav was a great Baal B'tachon. He was ready to jump into the waters They were ferocious waters. But he had tremendous about Petachin in the Rebbeinu Shem. He made a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. But it doesn't mean that he did enough work on kinna, on jealousy, or running away from machlekes. We have to know that in life we have to work on the full kaleidoscope of midos. That's why Rav Chaim Vital says that marriage is the mark of a man. Because in our relationship with our spouse, we have to work on the full kaleidoscope of our midas, how we're patient, tolerant, caring, selfless, generous, how our temperament is, that we're not lazy. And it's the full gamut, the full spectrum. Another thing that's scary is that a person that achieves great heights cannot go on cruise control. It says in Pirkei Avos, Al tamein ba'atzmecha ad yom moischa. Don't trust yourself until the day that you die. Why? Because Hashem ensures that we always have bechira. We always have free will. So once we overcome a certain area in life, here's a person, he wasn't have kavanah and davening, and he worked a lot in kavanah and davening, and finally he has kavanah and davening. Now Hashem tests him with Shmiras Einayim. He works on Shmiras Einayim. Now Hashem tests him on not getting upset at a difficult person. Right? Then Hashem tests him with if he's giving enough tzedakah. Right? So a person can never say, I don't have to worry anymore. Al tamein ba'atzmecha, look what happened according to Marav Shemesh. Look what happened to Nachshon ben Aminadav, the great Nachshon ben Aminadav. It says that Yochanan Kohen Gadol was Shimish as a Kohen Gadol for 80 years and then became a tzedakah. That's so frightening. For 80 years he was in the environment of the Beis HaMikdash, served as a loyal Kohen Gadol, and then became a tzedakah. We have to always have vigilance. We have to know, it says, Kol HaGadol mechaveiro yitzra gadol himeno. Whoever's greater has bigger Yetzirah, which follows logically, because Hashem always has to up the ante. That's why the Dor HaMidbar had so many unbelievable challenges. They're going 3 days without anything to drink. Why did Hashem do that? Well, they saw the plagues. They saw the Yamsuf, the eating man. If they're going to be tested, it's going to have to be a big test. That it should be a test for them. Before I wrap up, again, I want to thank the Rubin family for their kindness in giving us this share. Also, if you want to sponsor next week's share, the Chumash share given broadcasted live on TorahAnytime.com Thursday at 9, 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. We ask everybody to have in mind for Avigdaya ben Rivka. There's another thing that I want to point out over here. If you hold like the Marav Shemesh, like the Pashtus and Rabbeinu Bachya, and Nachshon ben Aminadav perished with the 250 people, Oyla Rasha, Oyla Shchenai, that doesn't stop Chazal for singing the praises of Nachshon ben Aminadav about what he did at the Yamsuf. It seems to be that the 250 people, even though they would suffer and be punished, but they have a future. And that future will include credit for their heroic actions. It's not all or nothing. Because you see that it's not purged and the praise to Nachshon ben Aminadav. I want to thank you for joining me. Remind you that Motzei Shabbos, you could join my Daf Yomi live on Zoom, 10:15 Eastern Time at zoomdaf.com, and during the week it's at 8:50. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a delightful Shabbos.